I have the honor of introducing our next keynote speaker, someone who I've known for quite some time, for a few years, and I've watched her do incredible things at local government, at the federal government, and now for our state government here in Maryland. Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about Katie. I know she's doing a great job now, taking this new role, leading technology for the state of Maryland. And funny story, my former chief of staff when I was with the city of New York came to work for Katie at Defense Digital Services. I offered her up as a great person to have work with Katie, and her and I just think the world of her. And so if you have the opportunity to know Katie, you'll see what an amazing, incredible person is. But you get to have a taste of her today. You'll have to work at getting to know her better. But for today, you get to listen to a little bit about what she's doing for the state of Maryland, what their priorities are, and just share that awesomeness with all of us. So let's welcome to the stage Secretary Katie Savage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction, Albie. I really appreciate it. It's really wonderful to be back with Smart Cities Council and this community. My background is in urban planning, but I took a detour over the past few years. I was at DOD for the past 4 years, and then recently at the state level. So now I can say I've done city, state, and federal government. But I'm grateful to be here today to talk a little bit about my priorities for Maryland. And this is the first time I've put this together, so breaking news, I guess. I became the CIO of Maryland at the beginning of the Moore administration. Governor Wes Moore became the governor in January and appointed me as the state CIO. So as I said, prior to that, was at the Department of Defense. I ran the Defense Digital Service. So you might be familiar with the United States Digital Service, which was started under President Obama in the advent of rolling out healthcare and the healthcare.gov website. There was a desire to have technologists at the ready to be able to help with such a major implementation. And from there, different agencies, took up the concept and created their own digital service teams, and so I ran the one at the Department of Defense. Prior to that, which is where Albie and I initially connected, I brought, coming right out of planning school, started an organization in partnership with the city of Chicago and major companies like MasterCard, Microsoft, here, Allstate, a couple other major companies. An organization called the City Tech Collaborative. And the idea there was that it was early days of IoT, was that we would use the city of Chicago as a test bed for creating urban infrastructure technology. Specifically, how we could better connect the needs and demands of city commissioners with what vendors could create, and connecting some of their background IP together into new products. The idea was then that some of the companies could take those as joint ventures and go to other cities and take them to market. So from all of those the experiences, I've developed what I think of as the definition of infrastructure. And I wanted to anchor, what I'm talking about today on infrastructure, because that's the theme of this conference. But I think it also informs my priorities as CIO for the state of Maryland. So when I think about infrastructure and when I think about my priorities, I have them right now in 3 buckets. So 1 are physical and digital assets. 2 is cybersecurity, which we just spoke about on the panel. And then 3 is human capital. And I think the third is most important, so I'll save that for last. So as incoming CIO, I have specific intentions as I become responsible for basically all 3 of these categories across the state. So with regard to physical and digital infrastructure, I'm realizing and connecting with some of my peers, other state CIOs, that you can really get swept away in trying to manage too much. It's one of the biggest challenges that I didn't anticipate, but I think is really common for state CIOs, is this idea of the tension between enterprise services and bespoke platforms for government agencies. On the one hand, you might have some of these smaller agencies that don't have IT staff, and you don't want them to get bamboozled by a vendor or worst case scenario or even best case scenario, they don't have user experience, product management, cybersecurity experts. They don't have the ability to procure the right system that will get their customers, their clients, Maryland residents, exactly what they need. So thinking of, I'll pick on veterans benefits, for example. That's a really small staff. And how do we, if they don't have an IT team, how can we help them create a system, for example, to better deliver benefits to their constituencies? So, with regard to physical and infrastructure, one of my first challenges is to figure out what we provide at the state level versus how we sort of empower individual agencies to build, buy, and operate some of their own systems. So physical examples in Maryland that make sense for us to own, my organization, Department of Information Technology, to own, include the state's radio system. So we recently launched the latest phase of our radio installation across the state. That's really critical for first responders. So that's something that doesn't make sense for individual agencies, obviously, to manage. So, something like radio obviously lives with us. Likewise, we were talking about hardware, and that's one, that's more of a gray area. When the last panel we were talking about endpoint security. And on the one hand, you could say, yes, let's let individual agencies, health department, human services, juvenile services, et cetera, manage their own fleet. On the other hand, you sort of miss the opportunity to provide security services. So thinking about better, you also miss the opportunity from a procurement standpoint to do that right. So those are some of the physical examples that I think we need to think about how we manage at the enterprise level versus a very bespoke platform within say the health department. Digital examples of what we want to manage at the enterprise level include collaboration tools. So thinking about email, phone, etc. We also have in Maryland a platform called One Stop, which is where you get all of your forms and licenses. Again, that is probably something that makes sense for us as the Department of Information Technology to own that more centrally versus allowing 1,000 different portals when all you're trying to do is get a business license as a resident. So my intention with regard to physical and digital assets is to think, to really reorient our team to focus on managing the product, managing the user experience, managing cybersecurity for those tools that are truly enterprise level, where only it makes sense for just one agency to offer that versus something that's really sector specific. Along those lines, we have, as Do It, we have a legislatively mandated role in oversight for tech projects above a certain threshold. But it's been really limited to contract performance. So the other thing that I think we want to offer with regard to, to physical and digital assets is how we can be a resource for not just fiscal management, but product management, UX, UI, et cetera. So my intention is to manage things at the enterprise level that serve all agencies, not just one, so that we can make sure they're repeatable and scalable. At the same time, to offer sort of centralized resources, to be a resource for cybersecurity, to be a resource for UI, UX, and to be a resource for fiscal management. So it's that navigating that tension between what we offer as a resource at the state level versus how we empower the individual agencies is the sort of, it's very murky right now, and that's the sort of first area that I tend to provide some definition around. The second area is cybersecurity, and we just spoke a bit about that at the on the last panel. But as I said at DoD, I led a team called the Defense Digital Service, and in particular, a lot of work around Operation Warp Speed, which is helping to deliver a secure vaccine to the American people. And our role in it was specifically, how we can shore up the cybersecurity as we're expanding the footprint of the federal government and Defense Department and creating the vaccine. So with regard to that, we created some put basic cyber hygiene in place. So MFA, endpoint protection, fleet management, et cetera. And we expanded the perimeter to not just be defense industrial based companies, but all of the companies that were involved in the vaccine rollout. So in Maryland, I'm bringing a lot of that experience to bear when I think about my cybersecurity priorities. So what that informed, what my experience at DoD has informed me. We have a special operations center, or SOC, where we can sort of start to observe some of these cyber incidents and to get a handle on what we intend to do in terms of helping agencies manage their assets. But I think one of my largest concerns, as I said in the last panel, is that I'm not sure that the tooling that we have in place is always connected to the most critical infrastructure. So my priority in coming in at Maryland is really to focus on being specific about what we are protecting and why. It's really tempting to purchase all of these different security products, and we all have some version of Okta and CrowdStrike. We're doing identity management, we're doing asset management, we're doing endpoint protection, but do those things really map to the state's most critical assets, or are we sort of are we rolling them out? Just whichever agency understands the importance of them, will give them that tooling. There's something to be said for that. Of course, we want sort of willing customers, but I think it's really important, again, as state CIO, to take a step back, work with the governor's office, work with the different agencies to identify, what are their critical assets that are no-fail, that can't go down, and to create a sort of a pathway to getting all of those assets on our tools and infrastructure, and prioritize those first. So tools are cool, and I think we've done a great job leading a lot of procurements and some initial deployments. But I feel like my job as CIO is really to take a step back and make sure that what we feel like is the most critical to protect on behalf of the state of Maryland is. And that not only goes for kind of current infrastructure or legacy infrastructure that's in place, but as we're thinking about new assets coming online, we're talking briefly about microgrids, for example. As new assets come online, we want to think about how we add cybersecurity, identifying which of those are critical assets, and speeding up where we are in terms of adding those to our tooling. And then the third area that I would consider infrastructure, maybe it's not quite the right word, but I think that the most important part of infrastructure is really people. So everywhere I've worked, whether it was the city of Chicago or DoD or now the state of Maryland, we're only as good as our people. And at Defense Digital Service in particular, I worked a lot on what I would call our human capital infrastructure. So I started right before the pandemic, and that sort of prompted when people couldn't come to the Pentagon physically to work, it gave us an opportunity to think about do people even need to be in DC to work for the Defense Department? And we made the decision that we were largely a software team, and the answer was no. As long as you were willing to travel, especially as we were trying to engage with customers, because you don't want to sacrifice user experience or user design. We ultimately didn't care if you lived across the country. So we ended up with engineers and designers and product managers that were all over the country. Some in Seattle and San Francisco and New York and Chicago. So we made the decision to be remote and distributed, and I think that goes a long way in terms of attracting and retaining talent right now, is that flexibility. People want to make a difference and come to the Defense Department, but one of the things that's really attractive about other industry is the ability to work sort of in a flexible environment. But the other thing that we really focused on, which I want to do for Maryland, is how we sort of bring people, how we attract that talent beyond offering them the flexibility for where they work, but also some of the incentives that we can offer them and the way that we make hiring a little bit easier. So to talk a bit about both, there are things that we don't do we don't do at Maryland, and I'm still learning if other states do this. but you can do relocation incentives, you can do retention incentives. There are things like that that I see no reason why we couldn't do for the state of Maryland. If we've seen someone be successful, for example, as a CISO for another state, what is in our toolkit to be able to say, we really value the work you did for that other state. Can we incentivize you to come and spend a couple of years doing that for the state of Maryland, for example? So one of the things I want to think about is how can we add to our sort of recruiting toolkit and make the state a really attractive place to work. Then the other piece of hiring, too, that I want to think about differently, and I think we built this really well at Defense Digital Service, it's just the process. I hear all the time that when we're in the recruiting and hiring process, especially, I saw this at the city level, and I see this now at the state level, HR is different than recruiting. And I think we put a lot of what I see in terms of the pipeline, at city and state level is, well, we have LinkedIn Recruiter, and they'll apply. Someone will vet them, and then we'll push them to our HR when they eventually, are in the job and negotiation, salary negotiation phase. And I think what I saw in having, again, to really build a team at Department of Defense in the middle of a pandemic is candidates are expecting a lot higher touch than that. And also you want your current team to have the opportunity in the process to really vet those people and see if they're a good fit for your team. So one of the things that we did at DoD that I want to bring to Maryland is this idea of a hiring playbook that includes not only things like retention, relocation, and other types of incentives, but also maps out for our agency, but hopefully can be a resource to the rest of the state, how to make candidates feel really valued from the time that you do use an actual recruiter or LinkedIn recruiter all the way through the time that they're in the door in a way that involves your current staff so they have buy-in, they're excited about the new people coming, and that ultimately leads to higher retention. So the infrastructure we put in place with regard to human capital, I think is just as important to manage as cybersecurity infrastructure and physical and digital infrastructure. So when I think of priorities, those are really where I intend to focus. Thinking about what we manage and being more discreet about physical and digital infrastructure. What we own versus what we push to the municipalities or the agencies to do instead. Cybersecurity, and again, thinking about how we maybe the theme here is actually priorities, how we prioritize critical assets versus just sort of allowing anybody to be online, but we're really intentional about what we're protecting and why. And then lastly, the human capital aspect of it and how we're likewise building a playbook for that and being really intentional about the staff that we're bringing on board. The last thing I'll say before I open up for questions is I think there's room obviously for innovation across all of these, and that's a sort of theme across all of these different buckets that I want to make sure to bring as CIO as well. With regard to physical and digital assets, I want our agency to be a partner to other agencies, health, human services, juvenile services, et cetera, to really not just in the face of digital assets, not just sort of bring online paper-based systems, but to reimagine entire processes and workflows to better deliver benefits to people. So I certainly want to be a partner in innovation with that. Same with cybersecurity. We spoke in the last panel a bit about data, and that's a huge opportunity. We're collecting tons of data in the cyberspace. Like we can see a lot of what the data could tell us are about bad actors, about threat models, and about ultimately helping us to redirect our strategy for cybersecurity. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation there. And then lastly, innovation in the human capital space. There are certainly ideas or ways to attract and retain talent that I haven't thought of, and would love to work with my fellow secretaries and with other states to think about, how can we use this moment in time to attract more talent to the state level? It's what I saw, in DoD is, young people in particular are really interested in coming to government right now, coming out of the last couple of years. I hear over and over that that people want to make a difference. They just might not want to leave their house 5 days a week. And so how we balance that, I think, is really important. So those are my priorities and where I want to bring innovation across all of them. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
I can field any questions.
Okay.
With the microphone, if anyone has any. Make sure this mic is on. Yep. You gotta turn these on.
Thank you very much, and very encouraging to hear such a logical and very well-formulated strategy for Maryland. Thank you for that. Maybe a controversial question, though. The third element, the human capital, and young people, like you say, that's so true that there's a real wave of engagement of young people. On the other hand, there's this whole artificial intelligence thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it's a controversial topic, but can you give me your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, working with people is important in the government, but there is also a place for automation and effectivization by artificial intelligence. And you're the CIO, so that's kind of why I asked that question. But thank you for your...
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it comes up a lot, this idea of, are we going to have people that will replace our jobs, and or rather the technology will replace jobs. And what I've seen is that AI can be an incredibly powerful tool, but it's just that. It's a tool that will make people better at their jobs. So I go back to an example from DoD, and it's obviously even more, it's even riskier because we're thinking about AI for targeting, for example. And so that's something you 100% want to get right. So first of all, where we are, I don't think there's a world where AI is replacing jobs right now, because we're still very much in the training phase of things. You need to, whether it's taxi data or targeting data or cyber data, we're still in this place where we haven't used it enough to have models yet. If to take the Uber or the Lyft example, it takes all of those routes to create the preferred route that you're going to see on Google Maps, for example. So I think we're very, very much in a stage where it's too soon to say, like, we can rely on this. And for that reason, you also don't want to rely on it, especially when these sort of riskier situations. Or you think about police departments. We're seeing a lot of AI tools for how we think about crime detection, and we really want to make sure that we're not. That's where you run into risks like bias in AI, for example. So we're still in a space where we need people to be involved for the training data. So say we get to the world where everything is perfectly trained and we feel like we can rely on these models. It's still something where I think you want AI to produce results that ultimately are vetted by a human can use that to make a more informed decision. So where I think about that for cyber, for example, if you're looking at DNS data, for example, so you're looking at where you're getting requests for your particular website. Where is that coming from? And if you're seeing DNS attacks, where are those coming from? What time of day? AI might be able to detect that and produce a model, but it's still the human in the loop who needs to be able to say, how does it inform what our strategy is going forward? Do we need to think about different types of protection? Is this not effective enough? What is the strategy that this informs? So I hope that answers your question, but I think it makes humans do their jobs better versus replacing them down the road.
So we got time for one more question. Sorry, we have to cut it. We had to cut a little bit into time. There was some guy in cowboy boots outside interrupting our session.
Hi, Katie. I want to piggyback off of that question, because a lot of times we don't say this. We have low unemployment. People get concerned about technologies. you didn't mention the number of gaps, positions that are unfilled in the public sector. Somebody said that only 60% of people in public sector actually came back to work. So you're operating on almost half a workforce currently. So if you can attract them and keep them, there's also a longevity that somebody stays with you for a long time. That's the core of your strategy, right?
Yeah. It's that's where I see the priority in the hiring model. Where I say HR is not recruiting. I think what we have right now is very traditional. Your first point of contact after someone brings you in, maybe you do a few interviews with like the boss. So I will say, even my team is like, I found this person, interview them, and I want to make sure that they've talked to 10 people on the team to make sure that they're a fit. And that the team is saying to me, I can see what this person will contribute to this specific job, and where I would partner with them on this, and where they would make my life easier by doing this. So I think part of it is the hiring model is broken, where we sort of leave it up to the job description to say, this makes this person a fit or not, versus are you connecting them with the people who are day to day doing jobs around them. The other thing, to the point around retention, and this is especially, I think, egregious at DoD, or really anywhere where we have these like grade systems, like the GS, 1 through 15, is we have, we look for people who match it exactly, and we say, so we want to pay engineers really well, for example. Like engineers in the private sector make, a couple $100,000, so we want to max them out at the GS-15 level. But we say a GS-15 has to have, has to manage 25, it has to manage people, or has to, do these types of reporting, or whatever it is. And like being super senior does not mean you necessarily do those activities. So sometimes there's a mismatch in the job description as well, which makes it sort of impossible to get people in and happy. And I know you're trying to so one last thing I'll say too is, especially when it comes to technical talent, is we sometimes focus on the junior level first. We say, like, I just need a developer, or I just need, a designer. But we don't, who are those people reporting to? And if we have people who have been in those positions for a very long time and haven't kept up with technology, we're going to lose people because they're being managed by people who have less experience than they do with regard to some of the tools and products that you can be rolling out. So I think those are all parts of the strategy for me when I think about reforming human capital infrastructure. I think we need to address all of those things, because otherwise, you're right. Like we'll work really hard to attract people and get them in, and then lose them.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you. Well, so that last point about human capital is like super important. I think we should probably bring that more into the discussion, is because also in civil service, there is a large percentage of people who are of retirement age, and we could be losing a lot of people in the workforce, and so we have to attract a lot of young people, or just people generally. Mid-career people are fantastic into government positions, but we got to make it easy for them to get hired. I know, because that was my first job in civil service, is fixing it for the city of San Francisco. Built a talent program, and it's hard as hell, but worth doing. So thank you. Cool. I want to give it up to our
I appreciate it.